So welcome back once again. We're going to get our afternoon started, and again, we've got some great information coming your way. And to introduce our next session, would like to welcome one of our outstanding members of the Athletic Band Committee, Casey Goodwin, who is the Director of Athletic Bands at University of New Hampshire. Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Barry. Hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce the first portion of our next session, Strategies for Creating Safe Spaces, Social Distancing and Rehearsals. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone to post questions for the presenters in the Q&A rather than in the chat, because that's going to make it a lot easier for us to keep track of them. There's been some great questions so far today, so I'm sure there will be more. We'll hopefully have some time at the end to answer some questions live. I'd now like to introduce our two presenters, James Weaver, Director of Performing Arts and Sports for the National Federation of State High School Associations, and Brad Kent, Music Director for the UIL, University Interscholastic League in Texas. James will be kicking things off this session, so please welcome James Weaver.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Casey. Really appreciate being here today, and we're looking forward to sharing some return to marching band and how that is affecting the high school space with some guidelines we have. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions on how this came about and what we're doing. We're going to kind of walk through some of that today. Before I share my screen, I didn't have a flashy PowerPoint, so I apologize. Usually when I present, I've got one of those. But I thought the way to go today would just be to kind of walk through the document as what it is and see if we can't just answer some questions there. The first thing we really need to understand with the pandemic shutting everything down is that it's going to be a slow return to normalcy. And I use the big air quotes for normalcy because we don't really know what it's going to look like yet. Every state, every community, every county will have a different return to activity program and protocol. So the way Brad and I have kind of designed today is that I'm going to go through a national guidance level. And these are actually going to be going out to all the states today. So you're getting a preview of this document. And what we'll do then is we'll say, all right, so here is what we have for our national guidance. And then Brad is going to go through and state like how he developed this for the state of Texas with the unique things that are happening in the state of Texas. So I think you'll get a good idea of how the national guidance can be viewed and then how it can be altered and adjusted for what's happening locally on the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And hopefully everybody can see that now. All right, so this is our guidance from our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, as well as our music committee for the NFHS. And if you don't know who the NFHS is, we are the largest organization you've probably never heard of. And we oversee high school activities in about 20,000 high schools through our state associations. So if you are from whatever state, think of the state association overseas basketball, music, that's kind of where we work with. So in here, this is all some baseline information. A couple of questions everyone's going to have to ask themselves is, will your state association conduct athletic and activities during a regular season championship if public schools statewide are closed to in-person learning? That's a question we're all going to have to grapple with, and one that we have no idea how it looks at the current moment. It'll be interesting to see how that does take place. And I think when we get deeper into July, we're going to know about how colleges are going to be reacting. We'll know about more how high schools and school systems will be reacting. The next thing we need to ask is, will your state association conduct an athletics or activities regular season or championship if schools are closed in hot spots within your state? So if you are a state that has a rural urban divide and your urban schools, for example, are closed, but your rural schools are open, are you going to be having state level events for that? Next question is, will your state association conduct an athletic activities regular season in sports deemed low risk or going up to high risk? We have not defined a marching band as low, medium, or high risk. We're leaving that to the state associations to determine. And then there's also recommendations unique to your states or regions or of your state that you need to take into consideration when developing return to activity guidelines. This is where we really have a recommendation to talk to your local health departments, your county health departments, and your state health departments to determine what they feel is the best course of action within your state or municipality. So we're going to go through a lot of this stuff here. I'm going to kind of fast forward through some of this. This will talk about some of the safety areas you can have, and we'll have more in-depth reaction to that here in a moment. But I really do want to scroll down here and talk about the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 reentry programs that we've developed at the national level. So the pre-rehearsal screening remains the same for all 3 phases. So we're really talking about making sure that directors and students are screened for symptoms. And we have a sample symptom survey at the bottom of the document that I'll show here in a moment. We also talk about the screening questions each person should have recorded and stored. Make sure you're storing them legally so it meets whatever legal parameters your school or system needs to have for COVID-19. Any person with a positive symptom should not be taking place in rehearsals. We should all be well beyond that point at the current moment. And then anybody who's vulnerable should not oversee or participate in any rehearsals during a phase 1 area. And so if you are over 60, 65, and you're overseeing marching band rehearsals, you shouldn't really be participating in most of those because you are in a higher risk category. Or if you have an immunodeficiency, you want to make sure that you're taking precautions to make sure that something in your immune system isn't compromised before getting into the areas. So when we go to here, we're looking at on our gatherings. So we are talking about no gatherings of more than 10 people. Storage and changing rooms should not be utilized during phase 1. We're looking at rehearsals should be conducted in pods of students with the same 5 to 10 students rehearsing together all the time. The rationale for this is if someone gets sick, you're able to do contact tracing a lot quicker if everybody who is rehearsing is the same 5 to 10 students. Social distancing should be observed with 6-foot intervals apart. Students should be spaced at a minimum of 3 steps on a drill when you're practicing for drill. The next one we will be looking at is the rehearsals can only take place outdoors in phase 1. This is a really big change. And if weather does not permit outdoor rehearsals, it is suggested that rehearsals be canceled until the weather cooperates. We all know in the summer, pop-up thunderstorms across the country are pretty common. So we really want to watch out for those weather instances, because I know a lot of times the initial place to go is like, all right, so we're off the football field because of lightning, we're gonna go to the gym. However, in a phase 1 scenario, which is determined by your local health department, we're not recommending going inside, at least in this phase 1 area. There will be more guidance coming about when we get into the CBDNA and NFHS study on aerosol disbursement. So we're hoping to have more solid data on that. This is right now just the CDC guidance, keeping everyone far apart. Instruments and equipment, including sheet music, should really not be shared without proper cleaning and disinfecting, including drumsticks and color guard equipment. This will also, I know Brad's going to go into a little bit more about the shared instrument components, and so I'll let him do that. The next thing we have too is that each student should have their own area that's 4 foot by 3 foot designated, that's taped or painted off. The whole reason for that is to allow cases and other equipment that they're bringing in to be self-contained, where they're not going to have contact with other students' equipment. So if there is a spread of the virus by contact, we're avoiding some of those contacts to occur. And then we get into the cleaning areas. We really just want to talk about, hand sanitizers, making sure that things are being disinfected, making sure that if you're using any chairs or any other sort of storage equipment, that those are being wiped down and disinfected on a daily basis. And then hydration. Hydration is very important in the marching band. Just want to ensure that all students bring their own water bottles. Water bottles are not shared, and that hydration station, so if you're using water cows or troughs or water fountains, those should not be utilized in the current moment. As we get into phase 2, you'll see here the pre-rehearsal contest screenings are the same. Notice we're not just talking rehearsal, we are talking about some level of contest. The big changes to this are no gatherings more than 10 people at a time inside. So we are looking at inside rehearsals. And then up to 50 individuals may gather outdoor for rehearsal. Still recommending the pods, still recommending the social distancing, those kinds of things. If you do move rehearsals indoors, we are looking at a 10 feet area between students and other individuals who may be involved on the inside, just to make sure that we're drastically reducing the area for contamination. We're also going to have to look at what does that mean facility-wise, because we're going to be drastically reducing the number of students in an indoor facility. Unless you have a very expansive space indoors, that'll limit the amount of people that could be in there. Cleaning guidelines and hydration guidelines stay the same. All right, in phase 3, we do have a change here with the vulnerable the vulnerable individuals can resume public interactions, but they need to take precautions such as physical distancing and wearing masks when practical. We also want to make sure that anybody who is showing any fever, cold symptoms, flu symptoms, COVID-19 symptoms, that they really do check in with their appropriate healthcare provider and don't participate in rehearsals. The limitations obviously are down dramatically from phase 1, phase 2. So looking at gatherings of 50 individuals indoors or outdoors. And then when not directly participating, we need to make sure that there's a maintained distance of 3 to 6 feet between each individual. We recommend using a tape or paint to make sure that people understand just how far 3 to 6 feet are. It is fascinating. Even adults in the world are like, stay 6 feet apart, and we really don't know how to visually judge 6 feet. So having some sort of marker out there will be helpful. Facility cleaning stays the same, hydration stays the same. When we get into contests, we really are talking about some very interesting things that could be existing for this, such as what do we do with transportation? Do we social distance within transportation? Those are all things we're going to have to talk about with our state and local health departments, with our school administrators, and making sure that there's enough buses or vans available, and will we need to increase that, and what kind of budgetary concerns will that have? During events in warm-up and clinic rooms, making sure that we're finding ways to socially distance that may change the workflow of how some of those areas are available for the students and other members of the ensembles. And then who should be allowed in the event. So on a tier 1, obviously student participants, directors, adjudicator staff, medical staff if needed, and then security. On a tier 2, we look at media, and on tier 3, the spectators and the vendors. That's kind of where we're looking at. So we really want to get the students participating again first, and then after that we can layer on who's allowed into the venues for contests and other areas. We do have some marching bands that have athletic training services, so there is a push to remain in the athletic training service. The other thing we want to push out that I'll talk about here real quick before we get to Brad is the return to physical activity. As you know, and I know for this from my kids, they're not doing a whole lot of stuff right now. They're definitely not in marching band or soccer shape. And so we will have some more acclimatization period to look at as we get into that, especially if we're not starting marching band until July, August. Some of our southern latitude states, and well, every state in the US, basically, the hottest time of year is going to be July and August. And so we really need to look at that heat optimization component and make sure that our students are getting back into shape, and then we're not having to just pass out from not being in shape on the football field. And then I will show here real quick, this is what the monitoring form looks like for the symptom check. So you'll be able to see, you can put the name, the time to check, the answers yes, no to these areas. And that way you can keep those and print off as many of those pages as you would need. The goal to this, though, is make sure you're storing it in a way in which is going to keep your privacy commitments intact. So with that, I will stop my quick overview of the national guidelines, and we'll turn it over to Casey and Brett.
Can I jump in real quick? A few people have asked about the phases. Do they correspond with what phase your state is at, or how do people know which phase they're at?
Yeah, good question. They correspond with what your state or local health department will say what phase you're in. So this is a good place. So a school district superintendent obviously is having lots of conversations with the local health departments in most schools. So that's a conversation where the local health department will tell the superintendent, and you have an administrative conversation that says, this is about the phase that we're in.
Okay, and also someone was wondering if this document is similar to the one that was released for sports.
Yes, it is based off the one that's released for sports. It's the same organization. So the NFHS is sports and performing arts. This one was just delayed a little bit because we had some other issues we needed to work through. But this should be released later on today.
Great. Let's turn it over to Brad, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, James, for the opportunity to be here today. Barry, thank you so much for all your work. This is a group near and dear to my heart. I spent 9 years teaching on the university level and teaching marching band during that time. So I have immense respect for each of you and all that you do to serve your students and your universities. So thank you for the opportunity today. So my position, I'm the state director of music for the University Interscholastic League in Texas. And we're the governing body, if you will, for activities in our state in music, in athletics, and also in academic events. And in music, we have about 750,000 annual participants in our events combined. That's not all in marching band. I think in marching band, the number is about 200,000 spread over close to 1,100 schools. So we consider it a tremendous honor that we have the opportunity to do what we do to serve our schools in Texas. So with that, just would like to share with you what we've been doing in our state to help our schools resume some type of normalcy in this challenging time. Our schools have been shut down like many places in the country since mid-March, and shut down meaning no in-person instruction, and that includes all the activities. So as we started reopening things in our state, we were working at the UIL in conjunction with our state education agency, our governor's office, and also closely with our athletic department to determine some protocol to allow our programs to return to some type of practice rehearsal model. And so what we released, the first sign of life, if you will, in our schools and state, in the state, we released on Friday, this past Friday, some protocol that I'm going to share with you in a moment to allow our band programs, our marching band programs specifically, and our athletic programs to resume. In athletics, they call it strength and conditioning, marching band, essentially music rehearsals and visual fundamentals, marching fundamentals. All of that being said, our marching band programs have restrictions on the amount of time that they can spend in the summer. So none of that has changed. It's just that we have this COVID related protocol to go along with that. So I say all of that too, to let you know that this is all changing sometimes, as you know, by the hour, even not even by the day. And so we've released this information on Friday. It's been overwhelmingly well received in our state. Most people have said, thank you for giving us something. There are some odd aspects to this protocol that I'll go over in a moment, where you a little bit of a head scratcher with how am I supposed to do this? So it's certainly not perfect, but it's something that we felt like we could do. We pushed as much as we felt like was safe, and that we knew we could get clearance through the protocols in the governor's office and our Texas Education Agency. So I will continue on by saying our state education agency released some information on Monday a week ago, before we released ours on Friday, with summer school protocol. And it said, some of you may have seen this document, it went viral, and it essentially said during summer school, the following activities should be avoided. And one was the playing of wind instruments, and the other was choir. And so after that document came out, as you might imagine, we were hammered with questions. Does this mean we can't have band? Does this mean we can't have choir? And so we worked with our education agency to establish our protocol. They approved it, and they amended their document to say these rules still apply unless you are following the UIL protocol, which for right now, for us, it's just marching band, because marching band is the only activity in the state that we have any guidelines for in the summer on a normal year. So we didn't create any guidelines for orchestra or choir yet, because in a normal year, we don't have any of those guidelines. So at this point, all we can tell them is to revert to the Texas Education Agency document. So I know that gets a little bureaucratic, and believe me, I understand, but I wanted to give you a little upfront explanation. So here is, as soon as I can get there, here we go. You should be seeing now, this is the website. I shared this in the Q&A. This is the information that I referred to. And I'll just go through this real briefly, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. So at the top, essentially, the document says we can start rehearsals and practices on June 8th under the requirements below, and we'll continue to work with the CDC and other state agencies to monitor this information and adjust it, modify it as necessary. Another disclaimer that schools should also follow local requirements and other state requirements when they consider having these practices and rehearsals. So consider being an operative word. We're not saying anybody has to do anything. This just gives you a path to do it. So it starts out by saying, consider having an individual. We don't specify who that could be. It could be a parent, could be another faculty member, wholly or partially dedicated to ensuring that these protocols are followed. First bullet, attendance is optional, has to be optional. This is consistent with other protocol right now. So a band director can't require any rehearsal currently under this protocol. Attendance records need to be kept. And as you might imagine, this could be for contact tracing if there is an outbreak that should occur during these rehearsals. Students should report to practices dressed in the proper attire. So what we're saying here is we don't want people changing clothes at the band hall before or after rehearsal. During practices and rehearsals, staff needs to must ensure appropriate social distancing, hygiene, safety measures are implemented. Schools must have hand sanitizer or hand washing stations readily available in the area and use it frequently. All surfaces in practice and rehearsals areas must be thoroughly disinfected throughout and at the end of each day. I'll come back to that coming up. No clothing, towels may be laundered or shared on site. There can be no shared food or water. We've had a lot of questions about this one. So our explanation to no shared food or water is that the students have to bring their water and bring their food with them. Band parents, as we know, typically will say, well, can we buy a bunch of sandwiches and distribute those sandwiches? They're not sharing it. But our opinion, that is shared food. We don't want multiple hands touching the same food or even wrappers. So we expect the students to bring their own food and water to any of these rehearsals. Before the start of summer practices, start of each week, schools should consider pre-screening all students for COVID symptoms, and explains how that could be done. There's a lot of verbiage in here, could, should. There are some musts. Students and staff must self-screen every day. Schools should plan for entry and exit procedures that reduce the number of students and parents congregating outside, mixing around the practice areas, parking lot areas. So what we encourage here is to have, when possible, have one entrance to the band hall, one exit from the band hall to alleviate the contact there, or minimize the contact, I should say. Consider staggering start and end times, assigning students to entries and exits. Already covered that. And the next one, if the school is planning to offer any transportation, the school should follow our TEA, is the Texas Education Agency guidance related to transportation. Students and staff must maintain, this is where it gets really specific here, student and staff must maintain at least 6 feet of distance from all sides when not actively practicing or rehearsing. When actively practicing and rehearsing, students must maintain 10 feet of distance. So a cloth masks are not required, but encouraged. Indoor practices and rehearsals can be conducted up to a maximum of 25% capacity. So what this means is in your band hall, if you're 25% capacity, which is determined by the school district, if it's 300 people, 25% of that can be in the band hall at any one time, and you could have groups of 10 in different areas spread out 10 feet apart. Now it's very limiting, but at least it does give a little more leeway to what the Federation has just put out. So if you have access to a gym, any type of indoor practice facility, you could utilize more of that space indoors. So outdoors, groups of 15 maximum. Indoors for us, groups of 10 maximum. Schools should limit number of participants based on available space. That's for outside. And also any equipment must be thoroughly disinfected before and after use. So that brings up a lot of questions, as we know, in the marching band world. And finally, at the bottom there, schools should consider having students remain with a single group or cohort to minimize contact. And this would be, again, in case contact tracing becomes necessary due to an outbreak within that small group. You wouldn't have to shut down the entire marching band program. You could isolate that within whatever group of 10 or 15 that was working together. So now we have two categories here at the bottom for risk mitigation. One is for outdoor activities and one is for indoor activities. And essentially they're the same, except for the group of 10 is the limit indoors. The group of 15 is the limit outdoors, and then the 25% capacity. So the equipment piece, the last bullet has raised some eyebrows, and I certainly understand. Any equipment such as keyboard instruments should be regularly disinfected during practice sessions. We're certainly not advocating cleaning rosewood marimbas with bleach or anything like that, but we had to put that protocol in there. It was required through our various approval processes. So our recommendation would be to clean any surfaces that the kids touch, and also to allow, in the case of a keyboard instrument, before another student operates within the same area of that keyboard instrument, to allow enough time to pass. And I believe James has some of that in the Federation protocol. He may share that coming up. He actually has some cleaning protocol with, I believe, some specific cleaners that could be used. But I want to be very clear, we're not advocating putting anything on an instrument that's going to damage it. You know, drum major podiums, equipment like that, that kids, especially that multiple kids are handling. If a single kid is handling it like their personal instrument, we're not saying they have to clean anything. It's essentially when the equipment is shared. So going on down, this is boilerplate language that we have on all of our activities. Positive cases showing symptoms, and this is the protocol if that were to occur. And then finally, COVID symptoms for screening. So it's a little bit shorter version of what James shared, but I believe most of the essential information is the same. And that's what we have in place now. Now, I will tell you that, again, this is changing sometimes by the hour. We're already hearing that this document right here may change again before it even becomes effective on June 8th. We don't know that yet, but and as you might imagine too, many of the band directors in our state are concerned about when it comes time to learn drill. Because obviously the 10-foot spacing issue is not very conducive to that, if at all. And so in Texas, bands cannot start learning drill until August 1. So all I can say at this point to anybody who asks is we're monitoring conditions daily. We hope that the protocol changes, but it's going to depend on the status of the virus and what is done from our governor's office on down. And I think too that we're going to see a lot of discrepancies, as James mentioned, between what's happening in our urban schools and our rural schools. I mean, we're already hearing most of the rural schools want to get on with things right now without any kind of limitations. And so we may see this fall less participation from some of our schools. We just don't know that. We could see, theoretically, there could be a school district says, you know what, we're not going to do competitive marching band this fall. We're only going to have students play at home football games because we're not even going to put them on buses. And so they're going to meet at the stadium. They're going to play in the stands only. And they might do some type of field show with just arcs to get out on the field, but no competition. So we may see that. We just don't know at this point. It's too early to say. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And I have not looked at I haven't had a chance to look at the Q&A. But that's essentially where we are on what is today, May 28th in Texas.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, Brad and James, and we'll continue to monitor the Q&A sections of things, and if you want to, feel free to jump in as well. We're going to shift gears because this is a great segue. Many of us are concerned about instrument care, how we clean those items, and so we brought in one of our local experts who has served on a national level, certainly before his new position that he's in now as CEO and president of the Music Shoppe, which is a music company based here in the state of Illinois. But Jonathon Breene is no stranger to a lot of us after serving Yamaha for a number of years and doing amazing work for that company as well. So we'd like to bring in Jonathon Breene, the CEO and president of the Music Shoppe. Jonathon, welcome.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks again to all of you for allowing me to be a part of the conference today. Yeah, actually, the segue is great. In fact, it was interesting to hear both Brad and James speak. As you can imagine, there have been a lot of questions about the cleaning and maintenance of instruments this time of the year, and so wanted to share some of the information that I had, and I'll post some links when I'm done here into the Q&A and into the chat rooms as well. So there's a lot of information circulating out there on the web, and some of it is quite good. NAFME and NAM have put together a really good cleaning protocol that's out there. And then the NAPBERT, which is the National Association of Professional Band Instrument Repair Technicians. It's a mouthful, but it's the organization that serves repair technicians all across the country, has also put together a really nice selection of protocols for keeping your instruments in good maintenance. So I will post both of those links as well as some of the other materials that we've collected here. The thing I think to remember, because you're right, there is a position. I mean, Brad listed the idea of cleaning them between each use, cleaning them between groups, not commingling. In some cases, that's just not going to be possible. There are going to be some best practices you can certainly use as you're keeping your instruments safe for your students. Not sharing mouthpieces is a big one. If you are using an instrument between multiple groups with multiple students, having individual mouthpieces for the students will certainly make a big difference. If you are sharing mouthpieces, again, making sure that you're sanitizing those mouthpieces between use is crucial. And there's lots of great products that are out there. One of the things to keep in mind when you're sanitizing mouthpieces or any kind of playing surface, we all have kind of gotten into the use of using the over-the-counter materials that are out there for that. And generally speaking, you'll spray the spray on the mouthpiece or on the instrument and then immediately wipe it off. That actually does not allow the spray to fully kill whatever bacteria or virus is on the instrument. So the best protocol is to allow it to evaporate anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 to 4 minutes between use. So again, if you're using a spray for keeping instruments clean or sanitized, make sure you allow that spray to evaporate so that it has so that it fully kills whatever's on that. The other thing to remember too, that our best friend on this is time. If you have instruments that have been sitting, we know that the virus, according to the CDC, does not survive on hard surfaces much longer than 3 to 5 days. And so if you have instruments that are in storage, generally speaking, you know, they will be safe to handle. We're using a quarantine protocol within our stores for when we bring instruments in, but that's something to keep in mind, that time is kind of your friend. That doesn't help you during the rehearsal process, but certainly as you're storing things or if you're concerned about things that have been sitting over the summer. We would encourage you to reach out to your local stores, whoever you have do maintenance on your instrument. Again, they'll have lots of different policies and procedures for keeping those things clean. Brass instruments are a little easier than woodwind instruments because of the ability to completely disassemble and submerge them and clean them and keep them in good working order that way. For woodwind instruments, there are protocols that can be used. We would not necessarily suggest that you do those on your own. You need to be careful about using solvents, obviously, on the wooden bodied instruments and even some of the resin bodied instruments. You know, some of the cleaning agents that you would use could either damage those instruments or certainly damage the pads. So you need to be careful when keeping those instruments clean. One of the things too that we've done some research on, you'll hear about things like UV lights or ozone treatments. What we found is that in order to be effective on viruses, because remember we're dealing with a virus here, viruses are a little more robust than bacteria. And so in order to be able to effectively kill a virus, the level of ozone or the degree of UV lighting that you would have to use is so extreme that it would be detrimental to those around you. The danger basically of using those protocols would outweigh the benefit gained by using them. So, you know, just be wary if you're taking a UV light that you're buying online and using it, chances are it's probably not got the intensity level necessary to effectively kill the virus. But at the same time, if you get one that's intense enough to kill the virus, it's probably going to be very harmful to the people around you and dangerous to use. So we would certainly not recommend that. And again, I would direct you to the links that I'll send, which will give some more guidance on that. What we find is the best protocol is hand washing protocols. You've mentioned that, both James and Brad mentioned that before in terms of, you know, using hand sanitization, hand washing protocols, basically cleaning the kids rather than cleaning the instruments. If the kids come into rehearsal and have washed their hands and used good hand sanitizing protocols, they're going to be less likely to transmit those germs to the instrument, and therefore no germs on the instrument to transmit back to the next kid. So certainly we're encouraging that in the stores. We're encouraging that for the groups that we're talking to, that if you can have your students be diligent about washing their hands with soap and water, about using hand sanitizer throughout the course of the day, it will certainly mitigate the risk. For many instruments, you can wipe them down after rehearsals using a typical cleaning cloth, Clorox wipe, Lysol wipe, whatever wipe that you have can work. Again, you want to be careful with Goodwins not to get that solvent onto the pads at all, but there are different things that you can do there. And we would again refer you to your local stores to give you some guidance in terms of what they can do. We are also looking at recruiting procedures for the fall, as much as we're talking about marching band here now. I know many of you have to deal with the concept of testing students in the fall for beginning band as well. And just know that a lot of these same protocols can be translated to that process as well. And there are a series of tools and protocols available for that also. So if any of you were involved with that part of it, we would encourage you to reach out to your local stores to get things going there. So I'll be happy to, like I said, post those links. Please team up with your local stores, whoever does your maintenance on your instruments. Again, they're asking these same questions. They have a lot of really great information that's out there, and encourage you to kind of take care of the instruments as part of creating that safe environment. I think that's an important part of it. And much of this is very, very simple. The protocols that we're talking about here, I know we're talking again primarily about marching band, but there are separate protocols for orchestral string instruments. Many of the finishes used on orchestral string instruments are much more fragile, much more susceptible to damage from different solvents. And so again, there's a whole different protocol for using with orchestral strings. I won't take the time on this today, but the links that I will share will have good information about that, as will your local stores. So we would encourage you to reach out on those as well. We take a quick look at some of the questions that are coming through. If there's anything here.
Yeah, Jonathan, can I chime in real quick?
Yeah, please, Barry.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, do you have a product that you recommend for the disinfecting that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a number of them out on the marketplace. In fact, the repair technician boards have been abuzz with this recently, because a couple of the products, which are mouthpiece fresheners, don't really have a disinfectant nature to them. We happen to use a product called Stera Spray, and I'll put that link in there too. It's one that's commonly found within the industry, but there are other products like that. The kicker is you want to make sure that you're looking for alcohol content or some kind of a disinfectant content. Again, as I think we all know, 70% alcohol content or greater is what you're looking for. So rubbing alcohol does work. You just have to, again, allow it to evaporate as you're going through. I would not use a Clorox solution. I know that bleach solutions are used for disinfecting, but if you're talking about putting that on a mouthpiece, rubbing alcohol is frankly the better choice on that. It's quicker to evaporate and less likely to leave a residue. It also is less likely to damage woodwind mouthpieces, because if you're using a hard rubber mouthpiece, if you're using something with the wrong kind of content, it could discolor that mouthpiece. So we like Stera Spray because it doesn't discolor the mouthpiece, but has great disinfecting qualities. And again, I'll put that link into the lib there. And then I also saw when sanitizing mouthpieces, can I use the same cleaning solution on the same mouthpieces multiple times, or does it need to be fresh each time? Best way to do this is, again, use an aerosol. Get a spray bottle. You can buy them, the cleaning solutions come, or the sterilizing solutions come in spray bottles already. If you're using some kind of an over-the-counter, like a rubbing alcohol, you can put it in just a regular spray bottle that you can purchase at any home improvement store, and use that to spray down the mouthpiece so that you're not reusing the solution, rather than actually having like a cup or a bowl or a dip tank that you're dipping things in. It's better to spray it and let the spray evaporate, if that makes sense.
Great. Something that I know we've talked about, and I'm sure has been on everyone's mind. Can you speak maybe a little bit to what you know from the industry perspective? Let's talk about, our brass instruments that have those spit keys. And can you speak to that from, again, what you've heard in the industry side of things about what to do with that? Don't do that.
Yeah, it's tough because you have to drain the water, right? You can't not drain the water, otherwise the horns don't perform properly. What we're doing in the stores and what we're talking about with our lesson teachers is to have each student bring their own individual towels that they use for draining water on, and then they take the towels with them so that we're keeping the drained water off of the floors, off of the carpets, those types of things. When we drain them here in the store during play testing or whatever, that's how our staff does it. They have their own individual little carpet squares that they use for that, and then they pitch the carpet squares after a certain period of time. Outside on the field, obviously it's less of a concern, and you just want to be careful you're not doing it, you're practicing social distancing, so you're not doing it within proximity to anybody. But again, indoors, it's a little bit more of a concern, and having some way to catch that water, that you're draining from any of the brass instruments is important, so that you're not just typically, draining on the floor like sometimes we do. And then obviously each student is responsible for keeping that close to them and not leaving it somewhere where it would come in contact with others. At some point, obviously there's you could take this to the nth degree, right? I mean, Brad kind of alluded to that too. There's really no way to do band in a hospital sterile environment. You can't do it. So we can only do best practices as best as we can to mitigate the risk as much as we can, which I think is what we're all trying to do, and look for those ways where we can minimize the risk, using common sense from that perspective. Does that help, Barry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I want to open this up. We've got about 7 minutes, and I know we've got a couple questions still for Jonathon here, but if we have any questions for James and Brad as well, let's get those questions going in the Q&A portion of Zoom. Jonathon, there's one here for a sanitizer. You can probably read it there. What about Star San, which is used for things like beer bottles?
Yeah, Star San I am not familiar with, so I would not, I'm not in a position where I can speak to it. Again, when I send the links, I'll click the links in here in a minute. I would suggest just, utilizing those. You may want to reach out to Star San directly. Most of the manufacturers of these products are really good about being able to provide you with the dedicated sheets, the MSDS sheets on what they can or cannot do. So I would reach out to them directly, or whoever you're getting that from, to determine whether or not it's truly effective. There was another question from Mr. Goodwin about ultrasonic cleaning, and we actually do use an ultrasonic cleaner. Again, that's a cleaning machine that uses sonic vibrations to vibrate out the crud from horns. It's pretty common within our industry. Most music stores will use these now. It's become very commonplace. The ultrasonic cleaning in and of itself does not kill the virus, but the cleaning solution that you use in the cleaner will. And then the rinse that you use after cleaning, because when you're done with an ultrasonic cleaning, you'll run it through soap and water, rinsing out all the tubes and scrubbing the horn down. So really that's the process that will kill the virus. But yes, if your technicians are using ultrasonic as a way of cleaning the instruments, the crux of that process will end up killing anything that's on the horn. That process can be used on saxophones and flutes and metal-bodied woodwind instruments as well, but it does require that keys be stripped down, which means that typically there's an extra cost. We've not been recommending that. Frankly, again, under the instances of, if we know that if it sits for a certain period of time, the virus won't survive, rather than spend the money to have the instruments completely disassembled and submerged for woodwind instruments, we've suggested there that we just do an external cleaning rather than a full dunk, and that seems to be effective. And again, assuming that you've got some time between the two. Yeah, and then there's another one here. What's the recommendation regarding collecting instruments now and then disseminating to new students in an effort to ensure cleanliness? Yeah, we have a lot of schools doing this with us right now. We have a lot of folks who are sending in all of their instruments, in some cases more instruments than they normally do in the summer. Summertime is, generally speaking, the best time for most stores to take advantage of this, because they've got a 2-month window where you can be without the instruments and they can work on them. So if you're thinking about sending your instruments in, now's a great time to do that for most stores. Also, because most of us have been closed for the last 2 months, they've got plenty of bandwidth. They're looking for work. So they would be happy to take a look at that. I think everybody is prepared for doing a little bit more. Again, if you clean the instruments now and send them back to the school, if they sit for 2 months, it's not like you've lost any ground. They'll be just as clean in 2 months as they are now. So you can certainly get them in early if you choose to. And once again, you know, this may be something where at the end of the season or midway through the season, you may choose to bring them back in. Some stores will actually offer the ability for you to put these on an annual contract where you can bring them in on a regular basis and have them cleaned and work them that way. So hope that that helps. So perfect. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And not to put you guys on the spot, but any closing remarks? We still have a couple minutes here that we can maximize your expertise, but anything from James, Brad, or Jonathan as we start to wrap this session up?
Sure, I can answer the question on the 50-person total by actually answering it, or I can actually answer it. So the issue we have with the 50-person is, remember, that's a phase 2 and phase 3 50-person limitation. When we're getting into talking about full-on marching band contests, football games, adding in cheerleaders, bands, all that kind of stuff, when you're ready for that level, you are no longer in one of the phases, right? Like your state and your local area has, health departments have told you that there are no restrictions available or no restrictions upon us anymore. And then you're no longer with that 50-person. So if you're still talking about 50-person on each team, or when you add cheer and band and all that, that means you're still within a restricted environment from your local and state health departments. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why the 50 number is out there. But I do want to say, and I say this a lot on the panels I talk on, you know, music directors are professional problem solvers, right? And so we just need to find the right data. And once we get the right data, I'm excited to watch our music educators go out there, innovate, and solve the problems. That's what we're really good at. I say it a lot too, and I know Mark and I've had a lot of conversations about this as well. If you need problems solved, you give it to a music educator. They're going to figure it out. And so I'm proud to be part of this community, and we're here to help and support as much as we can as we try to navigate what happens here in the fall.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. We chose to not use the phase language because we're just going to adapt the protocol as it changes. That way people aren't confused as to what phase we're in. They just look at the protocol and the date on the protocol and follow that. So we're hoping that model works. And just in closing too, I'd just like to say thank you so much. And we're all optimistic that at some point we'll be able to have marching band here. We're not sure what it going to look like yet in the short term, but we're very optimistic, and we'll just keep fighting the good fight and doing what we can within the safety guidelines that we have. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks. And I'll just add one more. I forgot to mention interior of the cases. Somebody asked a question. Again, with COVID, keep in mind that the virus actually survives for a shorter period of time on cloth and porous surfaces than it does on hard surfaces. So you can spray the inside of a case. We actually are using a dilution of rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, that we're using on the inside of the cases. It evaporates pretty quickly and hasn't been damaging the case at all. So again, check with your local store. And I also echo, I appreciate the positivity. We certainly appreciate all the work that this group is doing. It's been great to hear, you know, the idea of, hey, all right, we got this challenge. How do we tackle it in order to keep things going for the students? And I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it today. Thanks again, Barry, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Once again, James, Brad, and Jonathan, this was excellent information. We appreciate all your work that you're doing on behalf of music education across the country. And again, I think for many of us, with a lot of the information that was shared in this session, it's very eye-opening. I think maybe some minds were blown along the way with some of the guidelines that are in place. But again, I think that's something that is very key, that you can tell that the focus of safety and well-being of our students is at the forefront of everything that we're doing.